When you can see great natural beauty and astonishing wildlife, you can protect it. Precious land can be bordered, guarded, and designated national parks. But what if that beauty cannot be seen, and its overwhelming diversity of life cannot be contained? On the coast of East Africa, there are extraordinary projects set up by dedicated people to sustain the endangered marine environment. They're giving nature a helping hand to bolster the turtle population, introducing the next generation of Tanzanians to the jewel on their coastline, and making ecotourism into a sustainable model for the future health of the ocean. Tanzania in East Africa boasts world-famous iconic landmarks like Mount Kilimanjaro. There are many designated national parks inland, including the Serengeti and the Ngorongoro crater. These places are protected and governed by dedicated conservation teams, because we can see what we risk losing if we didn't intervene. But on the coast, it's a different story. The preservation of Tanzania's marine environment is significantly more challenging. One of the world's most famous conservationists is Jane Goodall, renowned for her groundbreaking discoveries of primate behavior in Gombe National Park, Tanzania. With a lifetime's experience of research in primatology behind her, Jane Goodall now travels the world, 300 days a year, supporting sustainable initiatives. She campaigns tirelessly as a spokesperson for the conservation of the natural world.
I think gradually there's increasing awareness about the fact that we're destroying the ocean, and with that, we're destroying the future of those people who for hundreds of years have depended on the ocean and its products. We have to think about, one, the services of the ocean, but two, the importance in its own right, and marry those two together. I think that's really important, so that the people who want to conserve it for the beauty and the tourism marry their vision with the necessity of the coastal people to live off the bounty of the ocean, which we are diminishing at such a fast rate because of the commercial fishing.
Throughout the long serpentine coastline, the length of the Gulf of California, there are a few privately funded projects hoping to make a difference. On the north coast of Tanzania, East Africa, there are 3 island locations that are benefiting from sustainable tourism: Maziwa, Chumbe, and Fanjovi. From north to south, firstly, there is Maziwa Island, a sandbank surrounded by coral reef. Since the 1960s, turtles have been laying eggs on Maziwa as it had once been forested. The baby turtles imprint on their birth location and return decades later to make a nest. But Maziwa is no longer viable as a suitable nest location. The high tides destroy the eggs. Here on the coast of Ushongo, a dive master, Kirsten Ehrler, coordinates the relocation of turtle nests from Maziwa and from all over the area. Secondly, there is Chumbe Island, featuring mangroves and a forest that's grown from a coral base. This project was originated by Sibylla Reed-Miller in the mid-90s. Her ambition was for the island to serve as an education center for the local school children, as well as being a much-desired eco-tourist destination. Finally, there's the island of Fanjovi. Biologist and entrepreneur Malcolm Ryan has been instrumental in creating a sustainable paradise in the Indian Ocean. One of his primary aims is to ensure the locals are aware that the ocean is a finite resource. All three conservationists are fighting hard to conserve these islands. Marine conservation in Tanzania suffers directly from three major threats. Firstly, global warming is destroying the once beautiful coral reefs, victims of warmer sea surface temperatures which cause bleaching. Secondly, overfishing and blast fishing is smashing up corals and depleting the fish stocks faster than they can be replenished. Thirdly, the human race is using the oceans of the world as one vast dump for non-degradable plastics. The natural world needs help, and these extraordinary individuals are spending their lives protecting these fragile ecosystems. But to protect anything, you have to care about it. And to care, you have to know that it's there.
When you need to conserve an environment, let's say the marine environment, one of the important things is education. Not everybody has the luxury of being able to go and swim among the beautiful coral reefs and see this amazing biodiversity. Not everybody is able to actually experience what's happening in the ocean, but nobody's going to really fight for it unless they understand it and feel it. So that's what we have to work to do, help people to understand the beauty, the biodiversity, and the importance to us and our future.
When Sibylla Reed Miller decided to take on a coral reef conservation project of her own, she was struck by how little was known about the reef. She saw how important its continuing health was to the marine environment, the fisheries sector, and to the livelihoods of local people.
I came to Tanzania as a conservation and education planner for development aid. I was running projects for about 20 years. In the early 90s, I decided to stay behind after my contract ended because I just love the country, I love the tropical coral reef. I just fell in love and stayed behind. There was little awareness about what corals are and how important they are for the ecosystem. Corals are called in the local language Kiswahili, mawe na miamba, rocks and stones. You would find very few people here in this country who knew that coral is something living. Very few people knew because there was no marine tourism at this time. I got hooked on thinking, dreaming about that project of establishing a private marine park to be run by the funds from ecotourism and to be used mainly for education, environmental education for kids and for people, including local people community, fishermen of course, and also officials. So this idea started to develop.
Tourism in Tanzania is one of the country's most important sources of employment and revenue. As such, its sustainability depends on protecting the natural wonders and unique attractions of the country. Biologist and tourism entrepreneur Malcolm Ryan sees the bigger picture that hampers conservation worldwide.
The biggest problem is population. 50 years ago, Tanzania had 8 million people. Now it has 55 million people. Of course, you want to increase your level of lifestyle, so you need more. Before there was no trade, before there was only personal consumption. Now you're actually selling. As a paradox, most of the octopus that is caught here goes to Europe. So the consumption is not even here, it becomes a business. Plus, we have to consider technology like dynamites. Dynamite fishing has been one of our biggest challenges, which we managed to solve a year ago. So finally, we have no more dynamite fishing in this archipelago, but it has been a tremendous disaster for all the coastline.
If I was sitting down with a group of dynamite fishermen, I would ask them, say, what effect do you see that it's having, particularly in the coral reef? You know about the ocean. You've worked in the ocean. What will that mean in the future? What will your children be able to do if you continue destroying the reef? I think I would want them to start a discussion among themselves so that it's not me telling them we shouldn't do this thing, but them coming up themselves with solutions and then saying to them, but there are other ways of fishing. Wouldn't that be better?
Of course, here development is at its initial stage, so Africans are saying, you in the Western world have already kind of destroyed all your resources and now you tell us that we have to protect them. But this is the wrong way to look at conservation. Africa must understand that it is for its own sake, it is not for others. Biggest challenges, I believe, are creating this awareness, making people at all levels, from the village, community level, up to the higher level and politician. It's a matter of their own future, the future of the country, the future at the end of the earth, but particularly of their own people.
Sustainable fishing here can be best described as one man and his boat. On this scale, fishermen and women can gather what's required to feed individuals. But the coastal region is under attack from commercial interests, where only profit is emphasized to the detriment of the world from which that profit is plucked. This old-fashioned bait and hook fishing poses no threat to the ecosystem. But the waters that have served so many for so long are being depleted of their resources in such a way that the reefs and fish stocks can never recover. Once coastal communities have no access to food, they'll become food migrants, moving inland to find another source of protein. This will not be good news.
Fish stocks are depleting everywhere in the world, even here, even though we're still in one of the most productive areas of Africa. But if we don't start acting now, in a few years' time, we will find ourselves with nothing left. That's what we're telling all the fishermen. They have to do it for themselves and for their children.
It's often difficult for some communities to accept what changes have been wrought to an environment that seems it would be bounteous forever. Another more significant and wholly natural change to the environment occurs here. 10 kilometers from Ushongo Beach is the sunken island of Maziwa, only visible as a sandbank at low tide. At night, female turtles return here to lay their eggs. When they hatched decades ago, Maziwa was a nest-viable forested island. If nature takes its course, laying on Maziwa today is a doomed venture. Usually, the female moves above the beach's high tide line to lay. But on Maziwa, there is no such line. She digs a hole, and once the eggs are deposited, she covers them up. Depending on the age of the female, clutch size varies between 85 and 200 eggs. This process takes about an hour to an hour and a half. After the nest is completely covered, she returns to the sea. Unfortunately, the sea will wash out the nest at high tide, and her entire clutch will be lost. But for those laying turtles lucky enough to be seen by a supportive local, there is a number to call. Based at Ushungo on the mainland are the Friends of Maziwa. Kirsten Ehler and project manager Rayabu have adopted a simple solution to this problem, a case of well-timed relocation.
If we can get to a tipping point of young people who have the right environmental ethic and the right passion to push through environmental programs for the sake of future generations, then we can start to have some hope.
To get to Maziwa takes a car journey to the coast and then an hour's boat trip to the island.
The most important message I have for people who are fighting to save a piece of the whole is that go on fighting, don't give up. Meanwhile, we try to get more people so that it becomes a network of people in different countries trying to do the same thing.
The Friends of Maziwa were set up in 2005, primarily to monitor the health of the coral reef. The turtle relocation project followed on 3 years later. Turtle tracks are a good source of basic information, and all possible data is taken from the site before everything is claimed by the tide. The report of the turtle's egg laying is not the only reason for the Friends of Maziwa to visit. The waters around the sandbank are extremely attractive to fishermen. It's believed that the team's presence on the sand is enough to deter those who know that fishing is illegal, but would fish there anyway. Finding the nest is a process that requires patience and some sensitivity. Rayabu will feel the sand giving way as the stick pierces a nest. Turtles usually nest on Maziwa at night. The relocation begins as soon as the turtle has left the nest. The nest will be exposed, and each small egg is very carefully placed into a turtle egg relocation device, also known as a bucket. An hour's boat trip later and the eggs are given a prime spot on the shores of the mainland. The process is a delicate one, and great care has to be taken in handling the eggs. What's known as the pivotal temperature is the single factor that determines which hatchlings emerge, male or female. Within this narrow band between 28 to 29 degrees Celsius, both sexes are formed. But warmer sand will then yield only females, while the cooler sand produces males. The sticks mark the spot, a location the hatchlings will imprint on themselves as a place to return to once ready to lay their own clutch, if they survive. The turtle's survival once in the ocean is beyond anyone's control. But having a healthy ocean is in everyone's best interest. By using a plumb line and a tape measure, Kirsten keeps a close eye on selected areas of the coral and the fish present. There are indicator species that reveal the health of the coral. Selected areas are also chosen in deeper waters to monitor the principal threat to the coral, rising sea temperatures. These small devices are temperature loggers. The data collected will warn Kirsten if bleaching is imminent. Kirsten is a dive master. Conservation work is not always in the purview of the scientist.
I think there's a misconception that to conserve nature you need to be in science or something like that. It's not true. Every single person can be and should be a conservationist if they care at all about the future of their own grandchildren. Once you get these young people and empower them, they're so passionate. People are listening to them. They may not be seen as having a huge high profile worldwide. After all, it takes a long time to become a David Attenborough or a Sylvia Earle. You have to get the knowledge behind you before you can do that. And a young person doesn't have that knowledge. But what we're trying to do is to give the young people the knowledge and the experience and to give them the chance to speak locally to their own audiences and to develop a passion there. And then this will translate as they grow up into some of them taking world leadership roles and getting the kind of exposure that a David Attenborough gets.
The young Tanzanians have precious few sources of education that can make them aware of the problems facing the marine environment today. The sea is simply a place where the fish are, not much more than that. But the next generation need mentors and teachers, and a sustainable ocean environment where they can see things as they should be. Sibylla describes what was then the new concept of marine conservation in the early 1990s, with her plans for a reef near Chumbe Island.
At that time, both in Zanzibar and mainland Tanzania, marine conservation was a very new area. So there was no legislation at all for marine parks and marine conservation. So I had to start talking about what a marine park is and that there's a market in the tourism industry for marine ecology, for coral reefs, to earn income, to fund the management and other programs. This was a very new concept for the government, but there was no marine park conservation legislation at all. So, well, it took 4 years and 7 ministries to negotiate, to do something which had never been done before, because this is a private marine park. It's the first private marine park in the world, based on a marine conservation agreement. This is a concept which now is quite common and used in the world, but at the time nobody had ever done it.
At Fanjovi Island, Malcolm Ryan puts his efforts into a very similar project.
I think Fanjovi is an example where tourism can become a catalyst for conservation. We started over 10 years ago. We have renting the islands of Anjove from the village of Songo Songo. And in exchange, we have an agreement whereby there is no fishing areas.
Of course, the locals still fish in the traditional way with sticks to pry out any unwary octopus hidden in the sand. The only fish here that gets blown up does it all by itself. Best to avoid the puffer fish. Apart from the spines, its internal organs contain a toxin more potent than cyanide. With experience, the underwater pressure on the stick can tell you if there's an octopus there. The locals have been taught to be mindful of the size of their catch. Too small, it goes back into the water, but not before spurting its inky defense at its captor. Fishing isn't a way of life here, it is life. With burgeoning populations, sustainability isn't preferable, it's absolutely necessary. Here at Songo Songo, the main island of the archipelago, fish regulatory teams take weights of the catch to ensure the locals are not mining the ocean too hard. Sustainability takes great patience. One fish species seem to be thriving. The sardine on their sardine run. But these fish are never going to be free of predators.
How do you persuade a government to understand that the marine life right here, you can't put a fence around it because the marine life will swim where it wants to swim. And it's going to need an awful lot of people who support the government in an issue like this. So that's what we have to work for, education and work in different areas of ocean at the same time and try to form a coalition of interested parties.
Coalitions begin with humble meetings, and Sibylla and Kirsten and their teams meet up on Chumbe Island to allow both parties to learn from each other. Good relationships with like-minded souls can only strengthen the causes they both champion. As Sibylla's own project moved forward, she tabled a list of requirements, and Chumbe Island fit the bill.
I was basically suggesting a marine park to be used for education, which means an area which could be totally closed for fishing. It should be a no-take area. I wanted to see first, is the quality of the reef still good enough to be preserved, you know, because some reefs are just not good enough anymore. And also, is this reef heavily fished? Are many people depending on the reef? So that would make it very difficult to close it for marine conservation. It should also be shallow enough to be used for education. Kids to be taken there for snorkeling. Kids could be taught there. It should be also good enough for tourists. These were mainly the criteria I had in my mind when going around Zanzibar. It took me about 2 months until I came here. So I proposed to the government, we need to protect this reef, which means the island is then the place for the tourism project. And it's just fantastic, you know, we have an incredibly rich, undisturbed, semi-dry forest growing on coral rock. You hardly find any soil cover here.
What you do find here in great abundance are extraordinary creatures who love coconuts. Spilled coconut water tempts expert, if ungainly raiders, into the kitchens. And they'll move heaven and earth, and a few pots and pans, to reach their goal. Coconut crabs are the largest land-living invertebrate in the world and are believed to be the largest any arthropod could grow with a practical, functioning exoskeleton. Their extraordinary bodies feature 10 legs. 6 are for walking. 2 small ones are for the more delicate tasks like feeding, and the remaining 2 end in large pincers for heavy-duty lifting and intimidating the competition. The furthest western limit of their range is believed to be Zanzibar, but they made it a bit further west to Chumbe. They feed on mostly nuts, fruits and seeds, but are also scavengers and hunters. They have the reputation of stealing anything they think they can digest at a later date. They have lungs rather than gills and will drown if underwater for more than an hour. Their acute sense of smell leads them to food. Human kitchen and food waste is a prime target. If these crabs are at home on human trash sites, then they must be very comfortable on the world's coastlines. Seashores are plagued by what can be summed up in one word: plastic. The Tanzanian coastline and its endless cycle of the tides allow this very human problem to raise its ugly head.
People are beginning to understand the extent of the pollution, the acidification, the die-off in the coral reefs, these huge islands of plastic, the fish that eat the plastic and die. There is a greater awareness of that.
8 million tons of plastic end up in the world's oceans every year, and that's a conservative estimate. Despite the more informed global populace, the message still has to filter down to the locals and the visiting tourists. For every square meter of beach, Kirsten and Rayabu pick up an average of 4 plastic bottles. The coast is almost 1,000 kilometers long. Most Tanzanian locals are simply unaware of the plastic problem. To get an overview, the bottles are divided up by origin. The Friends of Maziwa will make sure the bottles are cleared from the beach until the next wave of plastic strands itself. While the plastic is being dealt with, a small team of Tanzanians working with Friends of Maziwa patrol the no fishing zones. While the main culprit is commercial fishing, an explosive activity that destroys reefs, it is still illegal to fish within a set distance from Maziwa Island. Local fishermen are politely directed to areas of the ocean where fishing is allowed. Maintaining a fishing-free zone takes committed work. Just because there is a law against something, ignorance, willful or innocent, can always be employed as a defense. The local communities are often the last to be informed about regulations that will affect their lives.
This human population's growing, but all we can do is to get more people interested, more people inspired, more people to start their own small projects protecting their piece of the reef, and hope that we can get enough people interested, motivated, and governments that will support these efforts.
There is still a persistent misunderstanding that individually we can do nothing to help conserve the planet. What effect can one person have? It's good to remember that there are over 7.5 billion of us.
Probably the most common misconception about conservation of the natural world is that most people feel there's nothing they can do. I think there's greater awareness now about the problems that we humans are causing. They think about it and they feel helpless. What can I do? And so the most important message for them is that each single day we make some kind of impact on the planet. And the more educated we get, the more we understand that what we do multiplied billions of times does make a difference.
And I think the very important other aspect is working with the communities, make people understand. It's not something that foreigners have to do. Foreigner may be the catalyst, may be the instrument to start a process, but then the process must be owned by Tanzanians.
Tanzania is a developing country with limited resources, but awareness of conservation is starting to take root. Projects cannot be maintained without local knowledge, assistance and ingenuity. In time, given the ongoing education initiatives, the Tanzanians will take over the conservation of their own birthright. The local school children are given training on the use of the rudimentary snorkeling kit. It's a fun day out for the youngsters, with a harmless but potent agenda. Inspire a respect and love of the waters that make up 3/4 of our planet, and perhaps, just perhaps, the next generation will evolve the drive to conserve it. It's a long boat trip to Maziwa, but spirits are high. Some take to the water as if born to it. Others reserve the right to judge the experience a little further down the line. But for some of these children, minds will be expanded to accept coral as miniature living cities, places that naturally monitor the health of the ocean in which they reside. The Friends of Maziwa jaunt seems to have been a big success. If nothing else, the day out is certainly one to remember. If the next generation grow up with a respect of the ocean and are educated to understand why the ocean is so important, they may be instrumental in saving it.
From the very beginning, Chumo was a project made for local school kids, so they come over for free. They have a full day trip. They do snorkeling like any tourist. They go forest trail. They get whole class in the classroom.
So Chumbe is protecting the whole island, terrestrial environment.
Bus transfer, everything. So something tourists pay for $90 they get for free. That's what you have to do. You know, that's what we offer. It's something which any park can actually do. Also government parks can do that. There's always enough income to provide free transport, free entry for local people. It's very important politically. It is very important.
For those who pay for their ecotourism, there cannot be many experiences as charming in nature as witnessing firsthand the turtle hatchlings' release. Dates are confirmed and the nest is temporarily uncovered and inspected. Kirsten and Mohammed check that the little ones are ready for their moment in the spotlight. There are many enthusiastic tourists keen to experience for themselves the turtle's frantic dash to the ocean. Kirsten explains how the eggs, if left on Maziwa Island, would rot in the seawater at high tide, and so were relocated to the mainland. The success rate of this relocation project yields a surprising statistic. 400 turtle nests have been relocated and 60,000 baby turtles released. Of that number, 60 are expected to make it to adulthood. It's a sobering statistic, but turtles are endangered and need all the help they can get. 1,000 to 1 are no odds to bet on, but the relocated turtle survival rate is on a par with natural undisturbed nests. While turtles lay their eggs on unstable sandbanks and lose their nests, the adults are also under threat from people killing them for food and eating their eggs. The hatchlings are just beneath the surface. Without help, this nest would open at sunset. But help is at hand. It's difficult not to be touched by the sight of a tiny turtle dashing headlong towards the water. It's believed that the turtle uses the run as a form of locational imprint, an aquatic GPS that locks in the beach they were hatched on as the beach to which they must return to lay their own eggs.
Where are you going? Down there.
Under natural conditions, the tiny grey runners would take their fair share of losses from predators, crabs and seabirds on the sands, and fish once in the water. But it's hoped that one of these released today will make it to adulthood and return here in 30 years' time to lay her own eggs. The Friends of Maziwa is making a small but significant difference to turtle survival. And it is by changing our assumptions about conservation and sustainability that we can all contribute to the health of the Earth.
You know, it's really a race against time. We are losing biodiversity globally and also locally. Small steps, you win sometime, somewhere. You would like to have a much bigger impact on a bigger scale, but it's hard, so we have to work on it, that's all you can say.
One of the reasons that I can keep going 300 days a year at my age is the fact that everywhere I go, I meet incredible people who are doing amazing projects. Projects that literally are saving a part of the environment, a part of the ecosystem. And it's the accumulation of all these amazing projects and people around the world that enable me to keep going.
Times are ripe. You know, this is the right moment for people to understand, for action to be taken. And marine conservation is kind of been a little bit left aside and forgotten. But there are good examples as Fanjove, but also other places in Tanzania, other islands, other areas on mainland where success stories are happening.
If young people, and I'm really thinking about high school and university, if they understand the problem, if they're empowered to take action, the action that they feel is important, if we listen to their voices, if we give them a platform, then they already are changing the world. It's getting children into nature to understand and then empowering them to take action. That's really what's going to change the world.
This planet is faced with very specific threats: overpopulation, global warming, and pollution. There is no one answer to these problems, but there are many of us. If we change small aspects of our lives, we can create a cascade of change that can preserve this planet, one small island at a time.